Is higher critical scholarship really even more dogmatic than Christian apologists? Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion. Let's take a look at a video.
Have you seen this guy?
Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan.
And heard him say,
Increasing public access to the academic study of the Bible and religion.
What you need to understand is that Dan McClellan is a higher critical scholar, and that is what he teaches. When you actually understand higher critical scholarship, it's not as authoritative as you might think.
All right, let's see it.
Start off with something that's absolutely hilarious. They pretty much don't apply higher criticism to anything else.
So this is flatly false. Higher criticism has been used to interrogate all kinds of different literature.
David Kleins did it with Winnie the Pooh, and he came up with over 5 different authors.
So this is a laughable misunderstanding of a paper that is meant as satire. Kleins is not applying the principles of higher criticism to Winnie the Pooh in a sincere and sober attempt to see what comes out the other side. Kleins is mocking a handful of claims made by a handful of scholars within the field of source criticism because Kleins thinks they are representative of the excesses of source criticism. This is not an attempt to undermine the field or the methods as a whole. Additionally, Kleins' satire is pretty fallacious. There is straw manning that's going on here. For instance, the notion that source criticism identifies different authorial layers wherever there are different names for deity, therefore the different names for Winnie the Pooh indicate different authors. That's a reduction and caricature of what's going on in source criticism. So no, this is not in any way, shape, or form an illustration that the principles of higher criticism distort and pervert. This is just satire that this creator misunderstood.
And if we were to apply it to Stephen Pressfield, we would actually have to say that he didn't write The Legend of Bagger Vance because the stylistic differences.
That would only be true if stylistic differences alone were determinative, which they are not. And this is one of the reasons that we actually do scholarship rather than just publish claims about what would happen if we did do scholarship.
The primary focus of higher criticism is not to ask what does the text mean or how are we interpreting it, but how did the books of the Bible as we have them today come into being?
This is false. The principles of higher criticism were developed precisely so that we could gain greater purchase on what the text meant for their original authors and editors and audiences. And to do that, we have to better understand how they came to be and what their original historical, rhetorical, ideological, literary, linguistic settings were. And so it is bringing all the data that we can find to bear on the question of what did they mean and even what do they mean today.
Is it the way the Bible presents them coming into existence, which they pretty much deny, including authorship claims?
This is flatly false. The application of higher criticism to the Bible actually confirms that the authentic Pauline epistles were written by Paul, that Revelation was written by a man named John, that an 8th century prophet named Isaiah was responsible for much of 1st Isaiah, that other prophetic books were written by the people they claim to have been written by. It is flatly false to say that higher criticism just rejects authorship. Higher criticism is open to the rejection of authorship if that's the direction the data indicate. And here's the rub. Higher criticism allows the data to operate on their own terms and follows the data where they lead. Higher criticism does not tell the data where they will and will not be allowed to go. It is precisely apologetics that imposes dogmatic, brittle presuppositions upon the text in order to dictate to the data where they are and are not allowed to go, and then obscures the imposition of those presuppositions behind the false accusation that it is critical scholarship doing the presupposing only because the data never seem to lead to the apologist's dogmas.
Now, this is studied in seminaries, biblical degrees, secular schools. You're going to get exposed to this.
So there will be a spectrum of exposure that people will get to this in school. In most secular programs, and even in many seminaries, you're going to get accurate, adequate exposure to the actual scholarship. In most Bible colleges and many seminaries, you are going to get a pre-digested version of it that just feeds to you caricatures and then makes sure you know this is how we combat this caricature that we've ginned up. As an example, when I was doing my second master's degree at Trinity Western University, an evangelical university, we had a student in our class who had just come from an MDiv, and we were talking about Pentateuchal source criticism, and he said, I was taught that the documentary hypothesis had been debunked, and now everybody agreed on Mosaic authorship. And that student had to be gently corrected about what the critical scholarship actually says, and about how there is criticism of the documentary hypothesis, not its evidentiary foundation, but some of the conclusions at which it has arrived. So now we have the neo-documentary hypothesis, and we have other theories that suggest, well, maybe we should just speak about D and P and non-P, because maybe J and E are not actually full documentary sources, but just fragments from a later time period. And so when creators like this say that you're going to get exposed to this scholarship, this creator has not been exposed to the scholarship. This creator has been exposed to, and therefore is repeating, inaccurate caricatures meant to set up straw men that can be easily deconstructed. This is not scholarship this creator is sharing. These are caricatures of scholarship.
There are two presuppositions that you need to be aware of, which higher critical scholars hold. One, there's no divine cause leading to the initial writing and current form of the text of Scripture. It is a simple process of cause and effect and the progression of stories and narratives that are eventually woven together to become the text we have today. Second, and it's just as important, the Scriptures are just a reflection of the social and historical circumstances. And that's the reason that they reject prophecy as a means to prove the Scripture to be of divine origin.
This is a ludicrous caricature. These are not presuppositions that were brought to the initial higher critical interrogation of the Bible. These are methodological principles that result from the conclusion of generations of higher critical interrogation of the Bible. By the way, on the part of scholars who largely accepted a divine origin for the text, but realized some things over the course of study. The first thing is that the data do not support the notion of a divine origin or of real prophecy. Those are not things the data can demonstrate. Those are only things that one can just choose to accept. Those are dogmas. So when you say you don't accept a divine origin or you don't accept the possibility of real prophecy, no, the data don't indicate it. And the only way to accept those things is to just decide you're going to accept them. The second problem is that once you decide to accept them, you disable the entire critical academic endeavor because you are not allowed to question the claims of the text. All the text must be accepted as inspired, as univocal, as inerrant. Because anytime you say, well, what about somebody can hold up that divine origin, real prophecy trump card and say, remember, we accepted this arbitrarily, you're not allowed to go back on this. And so it disables the entire endeavor. And it claims for the books that the given scholar claims to be inspired and inerrant. And so for Catholic and Protestant scholars, those books are going to differ. It claims for those a privilege that are denied every other text. So you say, well, you've got to allow for a divine origin for this, and you've got to allow for real prophecy. But once we turn to the Gospel of Judas, or First Enoch, or the Quran, or the Book of Mormon, or the Bhagavad Gita, suddenly that allowance is not there anymore. We are exempting a specific set of arbitrarily determined texts from the imposition of critical methodologies. But once we get beyond those arbitrary boundaries, those other texts are no longer exempted from that, because you cannot demonstrate that any of those other texts lack that divine origin or that real prophecy except by imposing the very methodologies from which you are exempting your own text. So this is self-defeating. This is entirely hypocritical. This is a laughable caricature.